Today, we are reacting to the most crazy fucking deaths in fucking the history of life, motherfucker. You know what I'm saying? Now, majority of the ways that a lot of individuals pass away is because of the pew pew, you know? So, back in the day, I can imagine dinosaurs and all type of shit. Shit got treacherous. It was probably extremely unfortunate for a lot of individuals back in the day. So we're finna check this video out. Without further ado, make sure you like, comment, subscribe, give me some more video ideas, react to down below in the comments. And let's check one.
It may sound like a broken record to state the fact that humans as a whole have experienced an abundance of pain, which might not be that surprising considering that pain pretty much comes with the territory of life. But in some areas, one can argue that we've experienced more than other animals thanks to our very own creativity, let's say.
Bull riding is absolutely insane. It takes a special individual to fucking, saddle up on a fucking bull while that motherfucker is outraged. That motherfucker is extremely pissed off. And you gotta stand that motherfucker like 10 seconds. Perfect form. You know what I'm saying? Bull riding is insane. I just seen bulls stomp on some shit. And stomp on some shit. And stomp on some shit. And keep stomping on some shit. I wonder how much bull riders make. Does the money justify the fuckery that's probably finna happen?
And this problem of suffering and misery is not just exclusive to we modern humans, but rather extends to all humans, i.e. all species that belong to the genus Homo, who have sadly been lost along the way. And while no one can fully agree on the amount, it appears that the number of Homo species to have ever existed sits at around 14, all of who, minus us, have popped up and then disappeared within the last 2.8 million years or so. Now we, Homo sapiens, have been around for about 300,000 of those years, which in a general sense can seem long, but when you compare it to the whole 3 million years of the Homo genus, then you suddenly realize that it's really not. And when you think about just how long 3 million years is, you can start to imagine how much different the world of our ancient ancestors and cousins was compared to ours, which in turn means different experiences, different pains, and different deaths, some of which can literally not be recreated today. And not just because what killed them no longer exists, but sometimes because they involve unbreakable achievements, as seen with this first specimen, who is for now the oldest known murder victim ever. This skull may look a bit like yours or mine, but it isn't, as it doesn't belong to a sapien, but rather a Homo heidelbergensis, a species or subspecies.
The fuck is that? What the fuck? I've never heard of a Homo hygirius. I've never heard of a Homo hygirius. And I was very focused in school. But this shit looked like, what the fuck? Literally looks like 70% man, 30% ape. I've never seen this shit before.
Of archaic humans that existed during the Middle Pleistocene. And if it wasn't obvious, this particular individual has, or had, a major problem, and actually two, those being the giant holes in their head. It was clear to researchers who found this unfortunate fellow in a Spanish cave that the holes are what had killed them, and would have done so pretty quickly, causing a catastrophic head and brain injury. The only question is though, what caused them? Given that caves are sloped, and in many cases have plenty of sharp points, scientists first thought that a fall had taken out this heidelbergensis, during which a sharp rock had pierced his noggin. But if that actually was the case, you would not expect there to be two identical holes, and thus making the scenario unlikely.
And the crazy thing is, look, back in the day, in the cave day, when no Tylenol, you know what I'm saying? It was no the little clinic. It was no med care, you know what I'm saying? Med spot. It was none of this shit. You know what I'm saying? You fuck up your shit, deal with it, nigga. No ER. You know what I'm saying? No insurance, no copays. It was just deal with it, bitch. You know what I'm saying?
The next assumption was that it might have been an animal. But the problem with that is that there's no animal in Spain during the time that made anything remotely similar to such injuries. Which then led to the last hypothesis, as there was one thing that it did resemble quite a bit. Something that the anthropologists are all too familiar with. And that's injuries from human tools. Specifically, the marks looked a lot like those seen from stone axes, which can cause severe blunt force trauma, in suggesting that this person had been murdered. And given that they were done in about 430,000 years ago or so, they are now considered the oldest case of murder or homicide so far, and demonstrate that violence may have been a part of our history before we even existed. And surprise, surprise, it also turns out that this Heidelbergensis was not alone in death, as thousands of other Homo bones were found in the cave too, with a few of them showing signs of having been domed as well. Yet none were as old as this particular specimen. And the current belief is that this cave may have been the oldest examples of a designated burial site, where people who died from virtually anything were tossed into, be it a violent death or not. And in the case of our poor friend, this early violence could have been the result of a fight over resources or territory, resulting in him having been offed in the end. So overall, not a great way to go, but arguably much better than what happened to this guy, who was dubbed OH7. Now OH7 was not a Heidelbergensis, but rather a Homo habilis, one of the oldest human species which lived in South and East Africa. And in addition to being one of the oldest, they were also one of the smallest humans ever, with And in addition to being one of the oldest, they were also
So this nigga was a Homo habilis. He was a Homo habilis. How? I don't want to just sound too fucking stupid, but how did this shit happen? Because the first one, the motherfucking Australopithecus afarensis looked like full fucking ape. You know what I'm saying? Only thing is he walking like a nigga. You know what I'm saying? But how does that shit turn into full-fledged human? That's us on the right. We the Homo sapiens. You know what I'm saying? So how does, you know what I'm saying? Is it like the monkeys started getting pussy? You know? Or, nah, I'm gonna let him rock out.
One of the smallest humans ever, with individuals only being around 4 feet or 1.2 meters tall, resulting in them being very, very fragile and making life challenging for them from the get-go. But in the case of OH7, life, or rather death, wasn't just challenging, it was downright unfair, and is another case of a death that is no longer possible. And not because he holds any first-time achievements, but instead because he was killed by something or some things which no longer exist, extinct animals. This individual in life would have lived in an ancient wetland area where a variety of predators thrived. And it seems that one day, while out for a drink, he was attacked by one of the worst things you could possibly run into, a crocodile, and a giant one at that. And not just any old giant crocodile, but rather the largest true crocodile species to have ever lived, the crocodile.
Talk about bad luck. You know what I'm saying? Imagine the day you going out to get something to drink. You're a little quenched. You know what I'm saying? You know what I'm saying? And then you run into the world's biggest fucking croc. You know what I'm saying? No guns, just sticks and little weak ass staffs you made. You know what I'm saying? With some rocks attached. Then how does one even attach a rock to a stick with no tape? You know what I'm saying? They didn't have no duct tape. You know what I'm saying? Motherfuckers really, so he probably didn't even have the stick. It was just Homo erectus, Homo Alice versus big, hungry, strong, brolic ass croc. He was destined to die.
Thorbjornarsoni, a now extinct species which could crack 7.6 meters or 25 feet in length while weighing over 2 tons. So in other words, a very unfair matchup for our little ancient relative. Based on the remains, it appears that the crocodile had ambushed OH7, who had managed to quickly turn away, but was caught at the last second, as his left leg bore massive puncture marks. There were also parts of his leg that were completely missing, implying that it had been torn clean off in the attack, which in a hot mucky wetland was basically a death sentence, even if you didn't bleed out. And yet, Mother Nature still deemed this not to be punishment enough, as in one of the rarest cases known, it seems that he was then attacked by a second, completely different predator, a feline, specifically a leopard-sized one. Now, this doesn't necessarily mean that it was definitely a leopard that made up the tag team duo, but whatever did attack him, attacked the back of his head, leaving long grooves in his parietal bone, which does align with a leopard's hunting strategy, or at least a closely related Panthera species. And just if it wasn't clear, OH7 unfortunately died, as both marks on his head and leg showed absolutely no signs of healing. Now, I will say, it is technically possible that he died first from the crocodile attack and then got picked apart by a feline, but because the croc only took one leg, and because the damage from the feline was in a spot that is associated with predatory behavior, some think it really was a dual attack. And it's hypothesized that after getting attacked by the croc, he may have turned to face it while trying to fight back, leaving his back wide open to a nearby feline, and thus spelling his doom. And for what it's worth, even today, on multiple occasions, crocs and felines have been observed fighting over an animal. However, thankfully, the animals involved today do not include an extinct feline and a massive, never again seen sized crocodile. So this death surely must have sucked. But remember, it's not always the violent demises that are the most painful. Take Exhibit A, for example. This is KNMER 1808, a 1.7 million year old Homo erectus from Kenya, who had a troubled history with A. Not the letter, but the vitamin A, which, while being an essential vitamin, can be harmful in large amounts. And too much of it is what apparently killed our Homo erectus friend over 1 million years ago. And trust me, that's not a good way to go. Her partial skeleton was first located back in 1974, and scientists immediately noted there was something wrong with it, as her bones showed abnormal growth patterns, namely excess bone turnover, and held evidence of long-term massive bleeding. And yet, there were no clear wounds. And while this may sound perplexing and mysterious, it was actually quite straightforward to the researchers, as the bone growth were consistent with what's seen in hypervitaminosis A, aka vitamin A toxicity, a condition that is well known in both ancient and modern times, with this erectus so far being the oldest example of the disease within humans. The patterns in her bones suggest that this was a condition that she dealt with chronically, and is what ultimately killed her, despite it not usually being a very dangerous condition in modern times. And presumably, given the lack of medical awareness back then, she was taking in too much without knowing it, which on top of her bone problems would have caused symptoms such as weakness, headaches, sloughing off of skin, the loss of hair and teeth, and a lot of joint pain, which is reflected by her limbs bearing the most pathological bone growth. And it was likely over a long duration of time that she had these problems, which thus begs the question, where did she get all this vitamin A? And the answer is that all signs point to one key suspect: carnivore liver, a well-known source of vitamin A. And in some predators of today, like the polar bear, the liver can store so much of it that it could theoretically supply a human with nearly 150 years worth of the vitamin. And naturally, not knowing this probably played a big role in her undoing. Now, while likely not as painful as this ending, another prehistoric death that definitely would have sucked, simply going off of how scary it sounds, is what happened to the Tong childs 2.8 million years ago. In today's day and age, if we find ourselves scared by something outside,
how can they know the exact animal and time period of how you died, just based off how how your skull was left behind? Fucking insane.
It usually results in us frantically looking around us, or if in the water, beneath us, but never really up in the sky. And yet, a long time ago, you might have needed to, as large predatory birds prowled the skies and terrorized the lands of Africa, and were not afraid to take a stab at the occasional human, or rather hominins, which in this case was a seriously unlucky Australopithecus. And despite this breaking the Homo rule, because again it's Australopithecus, I am including it given the sheer uniqueness of the case, as the Tong child was found with horrific injuries to his face and head, including puncture marks to the bottom eye sockets, while the top of his cranium was deeply scratched. And interestingly enough, such injuries are actually fairly identical to what's seen in monkeys today that have fallen prey to eagles, suggesting that a large bird had sunk its beak and talons into the Tong child's eyes.
Oh my God. Imagine being out and about and a fucking strong ass eagle come down and just grab your shit. Just, oh my God. I don't know what's worse to deal with. Like the shit that like they going through or like niggas. You know? Cause the results seem the same. Just a bird on fuck shit. I've never imagine, bro, we see birds every day, like and they're like non-factors because they're harmless. But imagine if we had just like gangsta ass, like thugging ass fucking birds just all that little shit, and you gotta wow shit, they're gonna come grab your shit, grab your little nigga. Like you got a son or something, just snatch that nigga up, take him to the abyss. Before he grab your son, he can squeeze the nigga. She sees his eyes and shit popping out his head. Oh my God. This is horrible. This is literally worse than dealing with niggas.
head, likely killing him rather quickly, or at least hopefully, before he was then hauled off to be consumed. But the story does not end here, as his death spawned a new mystery. You see, the tongue child is really just a skull, meaning that the body was never found. And what's more, is that it was located in a remote part of the Kalahari Desert, in a cave, where no other bones were found, be it human or other animals, and thus leading researchers to ask how the skull ended up here, of all places. And this has led to a second hypothesis regarding the specimen, where in death, it, or rather its skeleton, had been used by its attackers to build a nest, before the head eventually became dislodged and tumbled down, which by sheer coincidence ended up rolling into a nearby cave where it would then lie for millions of years before being unearthed once more. So, with all this said, I bet you'll never look at birds the same way again. But something you're probably already weary of is water. While necessary to life, it can also cause extreme discomfort, to say the least. And drowning is often ranked as one of the worst ways to go, which is seriously misfortunate, as this might have befell on possibly the entire Homo erectus species, or at least what was left of them. The erectus were one of the most successful human species of all time, and actually the longest lived, having been the first Homo to not only leave Africa, but also colonize Europe and Asia, where in the latter they would make their final stand. And as far as we know, the youngest erectus fossils ever, dating to about 110,000 years ago, came from the island of Java, and strangely enough, all of them perished in a mass death event. To be exact, nearly 100 years ago, a research team on the island stumbled upon a graveyard of over a dozen erectus specimens, who were all adults and were mangled together in one spot. And given the lack of evidence for disease, physical wounds, or old age, it was presumed that they all had died at the same time from one thing. But the question is, what exactly could have done it? Well, based on the type of sediment in which they were found, it was concluded that a flood was possibly a part of the answer, with the belief being that all the bodies had been swept away by floodwaters down to a narrowing river, where they then ended up getting trapped in a logjam, thus forming a kind of carcass jam, I guess, which eventually fossilized. But this does not necessarily mean that they were killed in said flood, but rather they were just swept away by it at some point. However, for now, it is still believed that a mass drowning was behind the actual deaths. And one more narrowed down idea is the belief that a volcanic eruption in particular was their undoing, as it potentially caused lahar flows, which are cold and hot mixtures of rock and water that run down the slope of a volcano. Just brutal, as it involves one of the worst animals to be taken out by, a hyena, who are known to eat their victims alive and utilize horrific bite and pull methods, which rip away chunks of meat from the
motherfuckers that was on Lion King, you know, they was scarred niggas, you know what I'm saying?
Victim. Very painful, to say the least. And the hyenas I'm talking about weren't just some modern ones that you'd find on a safari, but rather a now extinct giant one, the Pachycrocuta, who was among the largest hyenas to ever live, with adults sometimes breaking 150 kilograms or 330 pounds, making them rivals to lionesses when it comes to size. And to make matters worse, their weight was not distributed like that of a lion, as they had proportionally massive heads, with massive indentations indicative of powerful muscles, which resulted in them biting down with monstrous forces, allowing them to do things like this. This is a multi-100,000-year-old erectus skull that was absolutely obliterated by a Pachycrocuta. And it wasn't alone, as this is actually just one of the more than 28 specimens found in the Zhaokutian Peking.
I've seen enough, you know? I've seen enough. I get the picture. Life was fucked up. You know? I get the picture. Again, a lot of these deaths, you know, really pose the question to me, and you should ask this to your friends, you know what I'm saying? Would you rather deal with some of the things that they had to deal with back in these ancient times, or niggas? You know what I'm saying? Just thinking the most gangster area in your city. You know what I'm saying? I don't know. It's a tough question. You know what I'm saying? Part of me wants to choose the niggas. You know what I'm saying? Because this, like I said, they got killer birds and shit, and I don't know. But pretty dope ass video, bro. Like, comment, subscribe. Give me some more video ideas to react to down below in the comments. I'm dropping multiple videos a fucking day. I'm on a streak.